But there's one other thing that's also necessary in this, one final factor, which is a political factor, and for those of us on the left, a very important political factor, and that is whether the domestic political elites are willing to go along with this. Now, in most parts of the world, the domestic political elites are willing to go along with this, are not only willing to go along with this, are part of this. There is no sensible political distinction to be made here between the Saudi royal family and American oil corporations. They may argue over the price, but in geopolitical terms, there's no distinction. To be had here. But in some parts of the world, there is a distinction to be had. In Venezuela, currently, under the current administration, under the administration of Hugo Chavez, that was by virtue of domestic political forces closed to the immediate influence of the oil industry was nationalized by Chavez. It was essentially closed off from the international oil cartels and from the pressure of the United States in a way which we can have considerably less admiration for the government of Iran than we might have for the government of Hugo Chavez, but for quite different reasons. The access of the West to the oil of Iran is closed off by the conflict between the American administration and the Iranian government. In fact, the fall of the Shah of Iran and the rise of the Islamic government in Tehran is something which the Americans have never forgiven the Iranian people for ever since 1979, and one of their long-term projects is to either overthrow or annul or by other means gain a supremacy in the Middle East, which they lost at that point and have never quite recovered. I want to spend a little bit of time now talking about that issue, about the kind of sources of political resistance, because you can see that even if we calculate all the socio-political, economic, geopolitical elements about where these conflicts might rise, where they might take place, what's at stake in them, still, at the end of this long chain of cause and effect, there still stands the question of political resistance, of whether or not the people and their political representatives will or will not accept this logic. Now, as I say, in many places of the world, this logic works its way out right down into domestic politics, and there are domestic political forces who are aligned with, who are making a profit from, who are all too happy to go along with these kind of projects. Now, there is a cost to that. It still produces a fissure between the domestic political elites and their ordinary population of those countries. There is a price to pay for a domestic governing class if they go along with the neoliberal project, if they go along with the use of American force and the American imperial project. It produces what in my country, which is a very close ally of the United States at governmental level, it has produced what's called the democratic deficit, of a fissure between what the majority of people in the society think and what the governing class think. So ever since the Afghan war, there have been huge majorities in the British population, 67%, 70%, 84%, not just against the Afghan and Iraq war, but also against intervention in Libya, now against arming the rebels in Syria. It's part of what's called in domestic politics now. I'm proud to have done my bit to help create this. It's called the democratic deficit, that there is a yawning chasm between what all the establishment political representatives, all the main political parties think, and what the vast majority of the population think on this issue. And I would say, if there's one thing that those of us in radical politics should be doing internationally, it is to create and sustain that gap. Moreover, it is to resolve that contradiction in favour of what the majority of people think, and the majority of people have not imbibed, internalised, accepted, certainly not wholly or completely internalised and accepted the logic of neoliberalism or the logic of modern imperialism. Opinion poll after opinion poll demonstrates this. Not just on the military. I've given you the figures for Britain on the military questions. On the economic questions, it's even starker. 84% of people in Britain think that there should be no more privatisation of any kind. Not based on ideology, they've just been having electricity provided to them at twice the price they were paying when it was privatised. They've been travelling on trains which are late, overcrowded, and fall off the tracks. So they don't like privatisation out of their own immediate experience of what it was done to has done to their lives. So there are resources of resistance here, and I just want to run through some of what I think have been, because in many ways it's been a remarkable a decade or so of resistance globally, and I just want to talk about some of the key points here. One remains a very old one in capitalism, and that is the presence of organised workers. It's fashionable. Previous speaker was talking about Hart and Negre, one of many theorists who tend to write off the organised working class. The problem is it doesn't correspond to experience. How can you say this when in Greece there have been 27 one-day general strikes during the current crisis, when the Asturias miners and the Spanish working class have mounted general strike after general strike as part of the anti-austerity movement, when the biggest demonstration, apart from the anti-war demonstration that we organised in Britain, was 500,000 people organised by the Trade Union Congress in my country. How can you say it when in Wisconsin the labour movement came to the rescue in many ways of the Occupy movement? So, despite all the setbacks, all the difficulties, all the defeats that the labour movement internationally has suffered, and it has suffered them in the period of neoliberalism, it remains an absolutely central resource for anybody who's looking at a radical political project. One other source is obviously that we are in something of an international rebellion of youth and students. Wherever you go, whether you're talking about Gezi Park in Istanbul, or Tahrir Square in Cairo, or the Occupy movement internationally, there is a resurgence of radicalism among young people. If you look at the opinion polls, radical ideas are concentrated down the young end of the political spectrum. Probably it was always thus. Revolution is a young person's game, but it's marked now. The other resource that I think that we have is a technological one. We are in a moment where a certain new form of communication is relatively free of the control of the governing elites. Now, I don't want to... There is a lot of theory around that the internet is in some way the Facebook revolutions. The Arab Spring was supposed to be, the Arab revolutions were supposed to be internet revolutions. Now, anybody who was involved, I was in Tahrir Square for 9 out of the 18 days. I have a long history of 10 years of working with the Egyptian opposition. Anybody who was seriously involved in that will tell you that is nonsense. Especially in a country where, there's 40 million Egyptians on less than $2 a day. They're not on the internet, never mind about organised by it. So that we can lay that extreme form of the vision of an internet revolution to rest. Nevertheless, and also another qualification, of course, their control of the internet is much greater than ours. The military and surveillance system, their control of what we do and what we see is far greater than our control. But having said all this, there is a moment here where a new communications technology becomes present, where it can be used before the lid is finally got down on it, before control is re-established. And this is a contested area. It doesn't have to be finally controlled. It can be contested and is contested now, but there is a means of mobilisation, a means of communication, a means of dissemination of information which wasn't there even 10 years ago.